invite you to explore our great city and the heedless impact of our dedicated nationalist politicians. Enjoy the triumphs of our great pretender, television's Nicola Sturgeon. Thanks to her, we boast the highest drug and alcohol death rates in Europe, and a life expectancy that's also the lowest in Western Europe. Now there's some records for all you leaders to check out during your visit. Why not take a stroll out of the SECC to see attractions like rubbish strewn everywhere, thanks to highly paid and wholly ineffective Susan Aitken? She'll bluff, bluster, and take her huge salary, but never actually empty the bins or fix the roads.
Quite simply, we have had enough.
And watch out for the plague of uncontrollable rats.
All cities have rats.
Cheeky little critters. Or why not visit Govanhill to see deprivation firsthand, courtesy of Nicola's Gauleiter, Murray Hunter. Just don't go looking for a library, because First Councillor Nicola Sturgeon has closed most of them. You've got to destroy the whole education system to keep the poverty cycle alive, right, Nicola? In the evening, take a stroll to Glasgow's magical Museum of Invisible Things, the curation of all Nicola's best promises she never enacted. The Invisible HQ of Nicola's promised public energy company, and many absent benefits of the climate change targets she's missed year after year after year. The invisible improvements to our broken NHS waiting times. And some advice: whatever you do, don't have an accident, and don't phone an ambulance, because you won't get one. So, international leaders, have you seen enough credible action yet? Take a look at our tragically distracted border-building parochial leaders, and imagine what this city and our amazing people could be if it were not for the malignant SNP.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to the Restore UK Scottish Night. And I hope you liked that little montage which was put together there by the host, the platform hosts. I think it told a very, very crucial story and a very accurate story. So, without any further ado, I invite you to welcome my guest for this evening. Jeff, good evening. Introduce yourself, my man, please.
Well, I'm Jeffrey MacDonald, and I've been how could I put it, a sort of political activist since a young age. I've always been interested in politics, since I was at school when I studied modern studies. And I've always kept an eye on current affairs and how the country works, and I've seen vast changes. I'm in my late 40s, and I guess, like a lot of people, can't believe the changes that I've seen. Yeah. That's probably the best way I can introduce myself.
Well, that's a fine introduction indeed. Much like me, I've always had an interest in politics also, and as I got into a little bit older than you, obviously, I decided enough is enough, and we really have to do something to try to stem this nationalist tide which threatens to engulf us all in mediocrity and incompetence and hatred and in resentment, and we're not going to have it, and that's why we do what we do. So if you could just tell us a little bit about the stuff that you have done recently, let's say, in terms of the unionist clubs and the work we've done there. Just if you could just spend maybe 30 seconds just describing some of the stuff that we've done there and what we're going to be doing next. Anything like that? Well,
the unionist clubs started in Coatbridge, and the people were very enthusiastic because they seen that the unionist parties, in essence, were very, very weak. And when I say unionist parties, I mean Conservative, Labour and Lib Dem. And they've seen that the SNP were not being challenged on their poor delivery on stuff like health, education, because all this stuff has devolved to the Scottish Parliament. And, they've been in power for so long now. And the unionist clubs, therefore, were formed in Coatbridge. And I think that they were going for a while before I get involved in them. You know, but nevertheless, I did get involved, and they seemed to bring a lot of diverse people together.
Yes.
That were across the board, mostly, conservative type people, but some Labour and some of the smaller parties, Reform, Alliance for All,
Yep.
the various different parties that exist. So
Yep.
that's the kind of area that the unionist clubs have been involved in.
Very good. Yeah, and I got involved along with Jeff about, must have been, oh God, about 10 months ago, maybe just after the election, really, because the purpose of the unionist clubs, well, they have several purposes, but the idea of the unionist clubs is to form a nationwide network of clubs which will deliver for our members and for our supporters a voice, a lobbying platform, and an ability, hopefully, to maximise the numbers of pro-UK, i.e. unionist councillors, Holyrood MSPs and Westminster MPs. We feel very strongly that the SNP is clearly in the ascendancy in Scotland. The opposition parties are not strong by any means. They're not effective either. They do a very poor job in holding the SNP to account. They do an extraordinarily poor job in opposition. They seem very happy to sit in more or less mute opposition as the SNP and their bag carriers, the Greens, the supposed Greens, because they're not green at all, enact more and more absurd legislation as every year passes. And even since last May, yet more utterly ludicrous legislation has been passed and continues to be so. So it's something we've felt very strongly we had to try to help to stop. And that's why we've done what we've done. Unionist clubs are growing bigger and bigger. I'm now involved in heading up the political strategy team, of which Jeff is a major part. And in addition, we will be looking at something a little more tactical, which is the plans for the local council elections in Scotland, which take place, I believe it's 9 weeks' time. I think it's the 5th of May, which I think is 9 weeks on Thursday, I believe. So just in case you're looking out for it. But the reason I mention this, one of the many reasons, is it's important that everybody registers to vote. Now, I know that's not an exceptionally strong message we're putting out saying, get the vote out. It's a little bit of a cliche saying, oh, all we've got to do is get the vote out, one more push. It's going to take a lot more than that, unfortunately. But first things first, we have to get people out voting. So I would recommend and urge everyone who's in Scotland who has access to a vote, please register. Now, the unionist clubs, all of the individual unionist clubs will be in touch very soon with some information telling people how to register to vote, how to register for postal voting, etc., etc. So we will also be giving our view as to how people should use their votes, because in the Scottish council elections, which Jeff and I will talk about just shortly a little more, there is a different, wouldn't you just know, a different brand of proportional representation is used, different to the Scotland's Westminster voting rules and system, different also, which is first past the post, needless to say, different, and it's the different system also to the Scottish Holyrood election. So only Scotland could do this, ask people to vote 3 different times in 3 different elections using 3 different voting systems. I mean, it's utterly ludicrous, really, but that's such as Scottish electoral life these days. So watch out for that, people, because it's very, very important that we do. The first thing to do is to get people engaged in political discussion. And this was something that happened very successfully in 2014 when we faced potentially the breakup of the UK. We were able to get very, very completely unprecedented numbers of people registered to vote and actually out to vote and actively involved in the discussion. And of course, we won the day, which was crucial. So let's make sure we do that again. So watch out for that. So yes. So I believe also, Jeff, that you may be standing for election in May. Is this a true story?
Yes. The way it's looking is that I'll be standing for the SDP in Coatbridge North. I guess that, looking like you're saying, the way these elections go, they're very, very different. So what's happened is that you can vote. If there's 7 candidates, you can grade them 1 to 7, but you can also just vote once, and that way your vote doesn't get transferred if there's a really good candidate and you don't agree with the other parties. Because what can happen is this: there could be some, say for example, the vote transference between Labour and the SNP is the highest between any of the parties. That was shown. This has been shown in by-elections, but it was also showing in 2017 at the last council elections. So what you get is such as it's not necessarily a nationalist unionist type scenario. Some people are quite happy to vote SNP, Labour. We have to be careful, because what can happen is people are saying, vote 1, 2, and 3 unionist and stuff like that. Yep. But what can happen is it can knock out probably the most strongest unionist candidate. And I've discussed this, as you've said, David, there's 3 different electoral systems. At Westminster, it's first past the post. You know where you stand. You've got 1 vote, and you use that vote wisely, and you hope that it pays off. In the Scottish Parliament elections, you have 2 votes. You have one that is, for the local candidate in the seat that you stay, and then you have a second.
That's right.
Yep. Then you have a second that is used in a region that's used as a top-up. So your vote's weighed. And then you have these elections where you can grade candidates 1 to 7. And people have been sometimes misunderstand what I've been trying to say, because I've been saying this for ages. Because we've been going down the route of tactical voting, the past several elections, it hasn't paid off.
No,
this is what people forget. It hasn't really paid off, if we're honest, because we have an SNP Green majority in the Scottish Parliament.
We do.
The only way I see that subsiding is time, and what I mean with time is everything has a cycle where people get fed up with it. I mean, Sturgeon and Swinney have been in the Parliament for 23 years?
23 years, yeah.
Yeah, they've been in politics for 23 years.
That's right.
Eventually, there's going to be a generation that's going to say, look, we want something else. They've been in too long. And it happens with, every party. They think that they're unbeatable, they get arrogant, and then before they know it, change comes. But not to digress, but in the council elections, as I've been saying, there's some pretty good unionist candidates on the various different parties, but what they don't realise is that in the 4th and 5th and the 6th preference, they might not have enough votes and they get knocked out. Because it's, vote unionist. It doesn't work that way. The transfers are clearly showing that a lot of the people that vote are quite happy to at council level to vote SNP and Labour. So that they have the biggest benefit, because a lot of the SNP's former voters are former Labour voters.
Indeed.
Labour for many years were the biggest party in Scotland, so they're not taking that into the equation. The other thing that they're not taking into the equation is there's a lot of councils that have a coalition. So the coalition that's big really is SNP Labour. They're running. I think they're in coalition in several councils.
I think it's 6. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 6. Yep.
Well, they're in 6. I think the reason why I said 7, I think the Conservatives and the Lib Dems run Eastern Bartonshire. That's a coalition.
Right. Yes.
There's a strange one in North Lanarkshire, because the Labour and SNP councillors number roughly the same, and the Conservatives have the kind of almost cast and vote. It's almost like the DUP Conservative arrangement, supply and demand, but they don't say that. They don't admit to that. They don't say that. But there's some unusual circumstances, and I accept that people, when they're elected as councillors, they've got decisions to make, and they have to make them because services have to be provided. But just let's not go in there and think that it's all plain sailing and it's unionists against nationalists, because there's all these unanswered questions.
It is indeed a muddled battlefield, if you like, and we've seen so many echoes of this even this week. And I know that to a lot of our listeners, let's not forget, this is a Northern Irish platform, although this is the Scottish night. Jeff, John and the hosts very kindly devote a Tuesday night so that we can express our views about the UK and the solidifying the links and cementing the links across the entire United Kingdom, but from a Scottish perspective. So the reason I mention this is a lot of people, I guess, in Northern Ireland who may be listening or watching will be perplexed to hear that the Labour Party, which is supposedly it is a pro-UK party, purportedly at least at national level, as in Westminster level, it's almost inconceivable that they would go into any kind of coalition with a party whose very existence is aimed at and specifically intended to break up the United Kingdom. And of course, one of the unintended consequences of a breakup of the United Kingdom, which is what Scottish independence would be, is that the Labour Party would never get into Parliament, in Westminster again, because it's been proven time and time again, Labour cannot win an election unless they take Scotland. There are 59 Westminster seats in Scotland. Currently, Labour has one out of 59. Now, this is why Labour doesn't win general elections. One of the many reasons Labour doesn't win general elections. Picking the wrong leader doesn't help either, of which, of course, they did famously in 2015 when they picked Corbyn. That didn't help. But even so, however bad Labour are, I still find it inexplicable and baffling, and as I'm sure many of our listeners and viewers do, when you hear that people are voting Labour first and SNP second. And this has to be, I guess, Jeff, a throwback to the days when you would get working class people especially saying, I'm never voting Conservative after Thatcher decimated the mining workforce and she decimated our towns and she decimated our industries and all that stuff. Now, I can understand it to a point, but the flip side of that is, firstly, Thatcher left office in 1990. There are several people now who voted 2 or 3 times in Scotland who were never even alive when Thatcher was in office. Secondly, what Thatcher actually did, in hindsight, as unpopular as it was at the time, was to turn around the British economy, which had become utterly stagnant. There was a dependency on public sector, nationalised industries, which were not only inefficient, but incurring unsustainable losses. And she stopped all that. And everything changed with the market economy that came in, particularly in the 80s. That's what she brought. Now, a lot of people, I'm not totally insensitive, I'm not remotely insensitive to the views of people who lived in possibly mining villages who had their only avenue for work taken away from that. I totally get that. But even now, if you look at it now, you're looking at a situation where not only did the Conservative Party governments close fewer pits than the Labour Party, the Labour governments did, which is a fact, but now you've got the SNP government who are saying, oh, well, we're never going to use pollutant fossil fuels again because we have a green agenda, we're going to be net zero and all this stuff. Yeah, that's great. But in the meantime, you've got to buy oil and gas in order to run your economy and to run everything that props up your economy. So all they're going to do is ignore the oil fields off the coast of Scotland and import gas and oil, a lot of it from Russia, of all places. So it's just like there's no path at all. There's no sense to anything the SNP does. So it's utterly baffling when you hear that, oh yeah, Labour, SNP, oh yeah. If Labour don't go in, I'll go vote SNP. And I know that people have got their own views and they're right. They're absolutely inalienable right to vote any way they please. But for heaven's sake, SNP, guys, just look around you. I would urge everybody looking at this broadcast to look at the montage at the start again once it's finished. That's what the SNP do, and that's only scratching the surface of what they do. They are the dictionary definition of gross incompetence. It's as if they don't even want the devolved administration to work because it's in their interests for it not to work, so they can say, of course, it's all Westminster's fault. If we were independent, it would all be different, which is, of course, complete rubbish. But that's the line they use. So it's almost a disincentive for the SNP to make Holyrood a success. So consequently, it's not a success. It's an abject failure, and it has been for several terms now. And we know that all of the major public services in Scotland are creaking, if not on the point of collapse. I'm talking here about the health service, transport, policing, schools, all are suffering unprecedented hard times. And this has gone back way, way before COVID. You know, the SNP tried to obfuscate this by saying, well, it's all because of COVID, you know, or COVID. Yeah, it's nothing to do with COVID. The health service was absolutely on its knees long before COVID. So, yeah, difficult times. But I think all we can do, Jeff, and I mean, I think we need to talk a little bit more about this tonight because there's the great opportunity to do this. We need to talk about when it might be useful in May to vote a certain way and when it might be better to vote another way. And I'd really like to explore that, if you don't mind indulging me on that. So let's just come back to that for a minute. Well, Jeff has made a very crucial point here, which is that the single transferable vote system, STV as it's called, which is where you vote for one person, and if you express a preference by putting a second one, as soon as the first preference candidate is voted in, then the overspill of votes not needed to get him over the line goes to your next person in line, etc., etc. Jeff has made the point that there are some occasions when that can backfire on unionist parties, which we'll maybe come on to a little bit later. But in some occasions, it might be better, as Jeff's saying, to vote singly for one person. The difficulty we've got, if we're going to do a voting guide for our members and for our supporters and backers, is at local level, there is such a measure of, if you like, local influence. So it's not like saying, oh, you can always vote this way, you can always vote Tory first and Labour second, or anything like that, like you could do last year in the Holyrood election. There was a very definite advantage there to small parties standing only on the regional list, which is the second tranche of elected representatives that Jeff mentioned earlier. Just as a reminder, just talk about that very quickly. In the Holyrood elections, there's a first past the post election of 73 constituency candidates. And forgive me if I'm repeating myself here, guys, but some of you won't have heard all of this before. So those 73 candidates stand as individual candidates in their own local constituency. So, for example, you get one, Airdrie Shotts, I think, is one, and Ayr is one, East Lothian, Aberdeen Central, Edinburgh Central, Glasgow South, Glasgow Kelvin, whatever. Those are all the individual constituencies. There are 73 of them. And people stand there individually. And whatever votes you get, it's first past the post. So if you come second with 25,000 votes and you only miss out by 2 votes, it doesn't matter. Those 25,000 votes are lost, gone, wasted. Secondarily, you have in the Scottish, the Holyrood election, this is, let's not forget, guys, that's what we're talking about right now. You have the regional list, and there you have 8 regions, West Scotland, South Scotland, Lothian, whatever else, Central Scotland, Mid Scotland and Fife, Highlands and Islands, Northeast, and I can't remember the other one. What is the other one? Glasgow. There you go. Right. So those are the 8 regions, and you get candidates voted there on a party basis rather than an individual basis. So when I stood last year, I stood for a party. So you didn't see my name in the ballot box anyway. You just voted for the party, and you get enough votes, you get in. Now the big advantage of that, if it's standing as a list-only party, is your vote is not diminished, because your party, if it's a list-only party, it therefore follows haven't won any seats in the constituencies. Therefore, your vote counts in its entirety. Whereas if you vote for a party which has won constituency seats in your region, then they are penalised or handicapped so that this is done so that the same party cannot win all of the constituency seats and all of the list seats. That's why it's done. So that's why there was a specific rationale behind what All for Unity were doing last year and what Alba copied us in doing, which was standing as a list-only party in conjunction with major parties who fielded constituency candidates. Now, the only problem with that is the SNP win so many of the votes in the constituencies that they win 62 out of the 73 seats. So the other 3 main parties stood 73 candidates, or stood their own candidates in all 73 seats, all 3 of them. Conservative, Labour, Liberal Democrat, stood in all 73 seats. The Conservatives won 5 out of 73. The Liberal Democrats won 4 out of 73, and Labour won 3 out of 73, which is a grand total of, was that 12? Is it 12? Is it right? Yeah, it's 12, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, so 12 out of 7, I think that's right. Anyway, either 12 or 11, maybe 11. Anyway, so these are the tiny figures you're dealing with here. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just abject failure to carry on going that way, but they did it. We, Alfred Unity and some of the other small parties, tried to add our voices by saying, well, if you vote for us on the list, if any of these parties have won constituency seats, then you won't have those. The list votes are not reduced in their effectiveness because that party has won a seat. So vote for us, and you get a clean, whole power of your vote will count. Didn't work. People didn't want to know. Now, so that means last year it kind of made sense that you could come up with a way that you could, if you like, play the system and get more pro-UK MSPs elected. This year it's different because you can vote for any party you like. There's no question of, if you've won here, you can't win there, like there is in the regional in the Holyrood elections. So we're kind of up against it now. If the last council elections, I think the SNP won 458 seats or something, and the Labour lost a whole load. The Conservatives made significant gains, I know, and the Independents made significant gains also. But this was in 2017 when Ruth Davidson was party leader, before she flounced out when Boris Johnson became PM after Brexit. This is when Ruth Davidson was very popular still in Scotland and was seen as maybe one of the rising stars of the Conservative Party and possibly a future PM. And a lot of people still think she maybe could be, which is interesting. It's a funny route to take, though, Jeff, going into the House of Lords first. But anyway, whatever.
Well, I mean, Ruth, the Tories have peaked in Scotland.
Yes.
And it's interesting, Douglas Ross, who I believe is quite ineffectual,
Yes.
he doesn't have he's got a charisma bypass. He doesn't have the same profile as Ruth Davidson. He's a very different man. To be fair, he's a very different man. But this is the problem. He's a linesman, he's an MP, and he's an MSP.
Yes.
So the problem is that he sets off right away as he looks as if he's in it for the money.
Indeed.
Do you know what I'm saying? Ruth Davidson is down in the House of Lords. Jack McConnell, the former Labour leader in Scotland, he's in the House of Lords. One of the big problems in Scotland is that the various different parties still use, the things that are open to them in London.
Yeah.
The SNP don't take their seats in the House of Lords. It's a kind of, it's seen as, taking the easy option in many ways. I mean, I'm sure that the people in Northern Ireland, there's several, people from Northern Ireland, the House of Lords, Lord Ken McGuinness, John Taylor. Well, some good. I mean, Lord John Taylor is very, very good. The Lords has a place, but it's too bloated. It definitely needs reform. And these people are hiding out the road. So I can't see Ruth Davidson ever coming back. I think that she was popular in Scotland because she was a woman taking on another woman. It's going to take maybe another, mark my words, Sturgeon will run out of ideas. She'll be there too long. Every leader faces the same problem. It's happened with leaders in the past. They're there too long and people get tired of them. They get tired of seeing the same faces and somebody else will eventually take over. I mean, Scotland has a problem that was similar to, not dissimilar and not similar. Northern Ireland, in the constitutional realm of the United Kingdom, I know we're speaking about Scotland, but just to get it clear, when all the changes really started taking place was around about the time of the Anglo-Irish Agreement, because you had MPs resigning their seats, and and then when Blair came in, the ball started rolling from 85, 86 in Northern Ireland, and now you'll see where it's led to, and these devolved parliaments, they make us less entwined to the Westminster, and the less Britishness, the less British identity is there. So, for example, in Northern Ireland, when you had people like Sir James Molyneux, the late Sir James Molyneux, Sir James Kilfedder, all these people, when it was run for Westminster, there seemed to be a better integration, right?
Yep. Yep.
You even had the SDLP, the people that were in the SDLP from the nationalist community did take part. So you had people like Jerry Fitt and Hume. They sort of took part.
They did. Yeah.
Now that they've got all these devolved, it's a different empire. It's almost like a Roman legion that goes native. They send it off to a Roman legion goes to Egypt, they become native. And that's the problem with the devolved assemblies. They've got their own power base, and that's very, very similar to Scotland. So you've got a lot of SNP MPs down there in London, and they're enjoying the high life because most of the work has devolved to the actual Parliament. It's the same with the DUP that are in Westminster. They don't have a lot to do because most of the things devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly, Stormont. It's devolved to that, and that's the same with the Scottish MPs.
Yeah.
Most of the bread and butter, health, education, etc., is devolved to Holyrood. Let's be honest.
Absolutely right.
Our MPs are really, they're getting paid for a part-time job, paid handsomely, may I say, very handsomely, because they get paid more than the people that are in the Assembly and the people that are in Holyrood. That's the strange thing.
Yep.
So the way the British Constitution has moved is awful, because it's really, really affected the Union, and you can see the wear and tear all the time.
Yep.
That as it affect, they're constantly gaining an inch. That's what I'm trying to say. We become, both in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, because so much has been put out to the Assembly and the Scottish Parliament, that it's gave the people that want independence or a border poll, is give them the object that they've set about. This has came about over years. And what I will say is that Labour were the party, Labour and the Conservatives actually, because Ted Heath, his declaration in Perth, they were always ceding ground to a Scottish Assembly way back in the 70s. So this has taken 50 years. But if we look where we are, I believe that there's more tension and we're less secure. The only thing I will say is that some people, if they look at what's going on in Russia and Ukraine at the moment, they will see that you're better being part of a bigger unitary state.
Absolutely
that is what you see. You need a good defence. You need people of caliber that lead you. Some of the regional leaders are not good because they don't have to make the big decision. What they'll do is they'll rattle the begging bowl to Westminster and blame everything in Westminster, and that isn't that isn't real. We see it in Scotland. We see if anything happens, they just blame it in Westminster, and that's a get out. That'll work for an extent. That'll work for a length of time. It'll work to a certain extent, but it's not sustainable forever. Nothing's sustainable forever.
Absolutely right. You can't keep excusing your appalling performance and your repeated failures on someone else, and that's what the SNP is doing. As I said earlier, it's almost a disincentive for them to make the thing work. They don't want it to work. They want it to flop so that they can say, oh, well, it'll work better if we become independent, so let's just give it a try. But really, the nonsense that these people talk. I mean, last week, it was Mary Hunter who was referenced in the little montage at the start. Mary Hunter is a very peculiar individual. She is a Glasgow City Councillor, SNP, and she appears to be Nicola Sturgeon's campaign manager in addition. And she's also the #1 SNP cheerleader on social media. So you always see Mary Hunter on there giving her opinion about something which has got absolutely nothing to do with a Glasgow City Councillor. So last week she came up with the great idea that we should just let Ukrainian nationals into the UK and worry about it later. Great. Okay. So, I mean, we've all got immense sympathy and admiration for the very, very brave Ukrainian forces who are fighting to keep out an invader, which is exactly what's happening right now. So you've got Mary saying, let's let them all come to the UK. How are you going to do that logistically for a start, Mary? I mean, how's that going to work? I mean, it's just utter nonsense. But this is the whole idea. And I said, I remember answering Twitter saying, great, okay, so why don't we just become independent and set up a new central bank as well? And then we will adopt a new currency and we'll have unfettered immigration and we'll double pensions and we'll double universal credit as well. We'll worry about the costs later. Don't worry. Come on, let's just do it. It'll be fine. Everything will be fine. Utter nonsense. And it's that level of debate you're seeing. It's literally a sixth form level of debate, showing no understanding of the issues at all, not coming up with any solutions which are in any way practical, workable. And that is what's happening in Scotland. And these people are running Scotland. And they're trying to say, oh, yeah, trust us. Yeah. Don't worry. Don't worry if we're not doing it very well now, because as soon as we're independent, you can vote for anybody you like. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do, guys. We'll vote for anybody we like ahead of independence. And we'll vote you out so that we don't ever have to worry about independence because you guys couldn't run a bath. So let's be honest, that's where we are. So it's ludicrous. But I mean, a lot of the comments, this is one good thing about this show. You get a lot of live interaction with people who are listening. Your friend of mine, Pete Morris, is one of the key guys here who always comes out. If you press your comments button at the top right, you should see it, Jeff. You've got Pete Morris saying that we have the same issue in this country which caused the troubles as in Northern Ireland, political conflict based on nationality, and there is no accountability to expose the failures and lies of the SNP. Never more true than this week. This very week, for example, we've seen the true colours of the Scottish press this week, as well as, of course, the SNP. At a time when all the world's eyes are on Ukraine for the most, really macabre reasons, which is because they are being invaded, and there's some very, very dangerous artillery raining down shells, guns, armoured tanks are in Ukrainian cities right now, because these people absolutely mean it. They're trying to crush this rebellion, the dreadful, awful thing. So what are we seeing? We're seeing SNP people saying, oh yes, of course, this strengthens the case for Scottish independence because it's essential to be part of a bigger group. Why would you leave the United Kingdom then if you want to be part of a bigger group? And this whole episode, remember that Ukraine willingly, voluntarily gave up its nuclear deterrent in exchange for promises from Russia 30 years ago, promises which Russia has now broken. Now, if Ukraine had a nuclear deterrent, would Russian tanks be in Ukraine right now? I doubt it. And what's the first thing the SNP and Greens want to do? Ditch Trident. And this is what they were saying. Who was it this week? Was it Jill Sturgeon? I think it was Nicola Sturgeon's sister. Who, if you've ever seen The Simpsons, Crazy Cat Lady, that's Jill Sturgeon. Anyway, I mean, I kid you not, she's a tarot card reader now, I believe, Jeff. Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying, David. If, for example, if a deterrent is there as a deterrent,
absolutely,
and it serves, it serves to an extent of, if North Korea's got it, I want it. If Russia's got it, I want it.
Absolutely.
It's one of the few things that we actually discuss anymore is defence. Yep. We're young people, even in Scotland, who, supplied a lot of the regiments with the troops. I mean, Scotland had a high proportion of, recruits and soldiers that were in the British Army, and it's one of the few areas that the parties of the Union, Labour, the Conservatives, it's one of the few areas that they actually go on the attack, to the SNP about take the game really to them. They don't really say much about it.
True, indeed.
So, yeah, I see. What I will say is that I see it kind of bottoming out. The 45 is probably about 40. And if Alba, the party that Salmond has formed, Salmond will have to go. He's not credible.
No, he's not, exactly.
Sorry, I can't hear you as such. There's something with the sound for some reason.
Oh, I can hear you fine, mate. I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Keep going.
Yeah, well, Salmond is probably good at getting money in.
Yeah.
But he when he goes for Alba and somebody like Kenny McCaskill takes over, Alba will start taking some seats and some votes from the SNP. And that's what you need. You kind of need the nationalist vote split. So, for example, if you look in Northern Ireland, you have Sinn Féin and the SDLP, and I think you have this new party, is it Onatu or whatever, you know? So you have these parties that are taking, you know, that take votes from one another.
That's right.
So it's not as strong. You could equally argue that with unionism. You have the DUP, the UUP, and TUV, and smaller parties. I get that, and I, in many ways, I believe that if there was the one unionist party, it wouldn't work, because if they made a mistake like the way they were supplying the Conservative government, the DUP did,
yep,
they've never really recovered from that. Let's be honest. And I know I'm speaking, you know, about Northern Irish issues rather than Scottish issues. But what I'm trying to say is this: although we can get downcast in Scotland because we have the three bigger pro-union parties, eventually it will turn, because it's inevitable that the nationalist group split because they don't all agree. And when that starts to split, when they're in there long enough and people start moving over, the SNP have lost a lot of activists.
yep.
There will be there's always a turning point in politics. And when that happens, it will be more beneficial for the parties that are speaking about, you know, the economy, education, health, the actual things that matter. And that's what we're waiting on. Unfortunately, it has been a long wait, but it will come.
Indeed, yeah. We've made the point. Some of the other guys with whom I'm friendly, if you like, who worked on. Oh gosh, sounds like a buzzsaw there, Jeff. Goodness me! Have you got a phone ringing there, Bill? Wow, I can hear a phone ringing. Anyway, never mind. Yeah, some of the guys with whom I'm ex-colleagues of mine in All for Unity and other political groups make that very same point. There's only two ways to stop a party which is very, very dominant. That is either fewer people vote for that party, or else more people vote for the other parties. That's really it. Now, the SNP at the moment, the 45 rather that Jeff talked about earlier, was the percentage that the separatists took of the vote in the 2014 independence referendum, because the result was 55.1 to 44.9. So a very, very clear margin for remaining in the UK. That should have been the end of it for 30, 40, 50 years. But of course, no, from the next day, the nationalists started agitating for a rerun and desperately seeking an excuse to stage it. And that's what is happening at the moment. And I maintain that Scottish politics is in a stalemate right now, not because of the constitutional debate. There isn't really a constitutional debate. All you've got is Blackford and all these complete carpetbaggers in Westminster saying every week, we want to be independent. And the Conservative government says, well, you're not getting a vote, and that's all there is to it. So, I mean, that's not even a stalemate. That's just not even a discussion. It's just people like Oliver Twist saying, please, can I have some more? No, you're not going to get it. So you can ask as many times as you like. You're not getting it. So, but meanwhile, Scotland isn't being governed, because every week in Holyrood, every single action taken by the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish government, which, of course, is, as we know, a coalition of the SNP and Greens, all united simply in their fervent wish to break up the United Kingdom. And that's everything they do has to be seen through that prism, because they don't do anything else. They have
David,
yeah.
One of the interesting things about the SNP also is this: the SNP, you know, let me explain. Sinn Féin are completely the opposite from what I ever stand for. Right? I have no truck for Sinn Féin. Right? I've never liked them. Right? The one area which you know I can have a bit of, you know, not sympathy, but a bit of say, well, they're standing by something here, but they don't stand by a lot, right? They've never took their seats at Westminster. Now, if the SNP were serious, if they were serious, they wouldn't take their seats at Westminster. If you don't want to be part of something, right?
Yep.
Why do you go down and take your seats at Westminster?
Absolutely right.
Why do you take all the money? These people are not serious. They're not
Indeed.
serious. They're devolutionists. But
That's
what they're
quite
doing
right.
is they're winding the people up,
Yeah.
and the people are falling for it.
It's rabble rousing, is what it is. So you've got,
Yeah.
This is it serves two purposes really. What the SNP are doing, because I mean Jeff is absolutely right. They don't want to be there. You got Mary Black sitting there using the place like a nightclub. You know, I mean, goodness knows what she thinks she's doing, sitting there ingesting whatever substance it is she was rubbing into her gums in the House of Commons one time. She claims it was a Kit Kat. When have you ever seen anybody rubbing a Kit Kat into their gums? You ever seen that, Jeff? I haven't. Anyway, that's what she claims. So who are we to doubt her? Anyway, so they're sitting there clearly like dogs in a manger, not wanting to be there at all, telling everybody how they don't want to be there, walking out the door every time they feel like it, braying at the government benches, making themselves look like complete fools. Now, the reason they're doing that is to be a nuisance and also to make some waves back in Scotland. But the nuisance part of it is the more, if you like, sinister and the more concerning part of it, because I've mentioned in this podcast a couple of times, I think, one of my previous constituency MP when I lived in Cheshire was Graham Brady, who's the chairman of the 1922 committee, very high profile Conservative group, and he's their leader. And I remember asking him, are you aware of the constitutional crisis and deadlock which is happening in Scotland? And if so, if there's an awareness of it, what do your colleagues think? And his first comment to me when I spoke to him was, well, of course, a lot of them think, well, if these people want to go, let's just let them go. Ha ha ha. I said, you're not serious. You're telling me the truth. You actually get Conservative MPs who say that. I hope you disavow them of that notion, or disabuse them of that notion, I should say. He said, oh, yes, of course, he immediately kind of backtrack. But it's clear that there's an element of that. But luckily, you see the Conservative front benchers, anyone who gets up to the dispatch box, summarily dismisses whatever nonsense is presented to them by anybody in the SNP. They never win an argument. But of course, all that does is really, it has the secondary effect of making people in Scotland these weak-willed, weak-minded individuals who look at everything through a prism of Scotland is being exploited by England, Scotland has been invaded by England, Scotland is oppressed by England. No, it's complete nonsense. But it adds fuel to the fire, if you like, and that's how they keep people voting for them. But eventually, the reason, what I think will happen, just very quickly, what I think will happen, I think the way that finally the penny will drop and people will stop voting SNP is when they realise that, hang on a minute, we've been saying for years now that Scotland doesn't get the the party we vote for in Parliament in Westminster. Yes, that's right. That's because ever since 2010, so in the 4 elections since then, 3 elections, 15, 17, 19, since then, Scotland has comfortably voted in a massive majority of SNP MPs in the Westminster election. Now, there are only 59 candidates in Scotland. So it takes 326 seats to win a UK general election. So you could vote SNP or for any other party. You could vote for the Monster Raving Loony Party in Scotland if you wanted, 59 times and get 59 of them elected. But you're not going to win an election because you need to be a national party. So eventually, I think people are going to realise, hang on a minute, why are we sending all these muppets down to London? They're not achieving anything. We're not any closer to getting independence. So why are we bothering? Eventually, I think they're going to stop. I think next year will be a pivotal year, Jeff, because they've pinned all their hopes on getting this referendum in 2023. We know that. There's not going to be a referendum in 2023. I'll guarantee you that. They won't. So how are they going to spin it? How are they going to spin that? How are they going to spin their defeat? What's your thinking?
One of the things that we're forgetting is this. The whole reason that the SNP are so strong, the SNP used to have 7 seats, 5 to 7 seats in Scotland, in Westminster.
Those were the days.
David Cameron and his advisors, he had an advisor called Sir Craig Oliver, who's now in the House of Lords. His dad, Ian Oliver, was a chief constable in Grampian back in the 80s and the 90s. And Sir Craig Oliver basically, was, Cameron's right-hand man. Anyway, David Cameron had a load of advisors, and what David Cameron's complaint was, I've only got one MP, David Mundell, in Scotland. How do I get rid of the approximately 40 Labour MPs in Scotland?
Yep.
And one of his advisors came up with, have a referendum. And since that referendum result, Scotland has been in turmoil. The very party that was meant to protect the Union, as it done in Northern Ireland with the Anglo-Irish Agreement, the very party that goes by the name Conservative and Unionist, by default, is constantly doing great damage to the Union. That's the analysis. You know, that's the crux. The very party, and listen, there's some good guys as they are in all parties. But behind the scenes, they're doing great damage. The other thing, just while I'm on, is if you watch the SNP at Westminster, there's some DUP MPs that get on really well with them. The guy that's in Strangford is great friends with them. The DUP MP in Strangford, you see him, you know, all the time. Jim Shannon. He's, you know, the SNP MPs have got him to, you know, sign things about Scotland. And I'm saying, you know, where does these guys get off? And, you know, it's one of the warnings about some of the people that are in unionist parties. They don't, you know, you have to understand the terrain and the other part of the island. And that's what a lot of people don't, you know, and it can do great damage.
Definitely. Well, we see this now. I mean, the Conservative Party only this week again. I mean, I'm talking about the SNP being opportunistic and really scraping the barrel in terms of taste and class when it comes to referencing Ukraine. Well, unfortunately, the Scottish Conservatives have done the very same thing. An MSP yesterday by the name of Stephen Kerr decided that yesterday, of all days, the day that Russian tanks are in Ukraine, was the day to castigate All for Unity, the party that stood last year to try to bring some sense into Scottish politics by saying, stand one party against the SNP to win a constituency, stand another party over here to try and win an list, and that's how we'll get a government of national unity and get rid of them. Kerr decided this week, oh, no, let's stick the knife into All for Unity because George Galloway's a Kremlin apologist and these people almost let the SNP win a majority last year. And so this is a reminder that you've got to vote Conservative. What a load of utter tosh. And so I replied by saying, if you look at last year, in several constituencies, a Conservative Party stood candidates whose vote share stopped the Labour candidate from beating the SNP. So the very idea that the Scottish Conservatives can have the gall to say that they stopped a nationalist majority is just a complete falsehood. 499,000 votes went to losing Conservative constituency candidates, and over 500,000 constituency votes went to losing Labour constituency candidates. That's over 1 million votes, and there were a further 170,000 for the Liberal Democrats. 1.17 million Scots voted for losing constituency candidates, yet a Conservative MSP is saying it's all George Galloway's fault for taking 23,000 list votes. Nobody believes a word of this, mate. So unless you can come up with a more plausible line than this, then I genuinely fear for the electoral chances of the Conservatives in May, because nobody likes somebody who's going to tell them a pack of lies, and nobody's going to vote for somebody who's telling them a pack of lies, a pack of revisionist lies, come to that. Absolute nonsense. So the idea that the Conservative and Unionist Party, as they style themselves, which seems more and more a cynical ploy, really, rather than anything that actually describes what they are and what they stand for, people are not going to keep seeing through that. John will tell you any night, if you listen to this podcast when John's presenting it, he will tell you about the despondency people in Northern Ireland feel about the traditional parties, the UUP, which is the traditional party, going back to the party of Carson, the DUP also now. Both have just fallen into complete disrepair, if you like. They don't have any effectiveness. The TUV seems a far more realistic option now. And that will happen with the pro-UK parties also. People are not going to carry on voting for the same sad, tired old parties any longer. Because why should they? They're not. They can't get elected. We know that they can't, or rather won't, form any sort of electoral pact with their hated rivals. Because, as you said, Jeff, a lot of them would far sooner form an alliance with the SNP in councils anyway. And in Holyrood, we know that they vastly prefer being in opposition, because this time last year, us guys, we were trying harder to get Anna Sarwar and Douglas Ross elected as First Minister than their parties were themselves, because they were perfectly happy to lose constituency seats because they knew they would get in via the list, because almost all of the 73 candidates were featured very highly on the list as the secondary option, so they couldn't care less if they lost the constituency seat to the SNP. Didn't worry them in the slightest. They were almost guaranteed they would get in via the list. So Scottish politics is clearly not working right now. The SNP are an absolute joke. The Greens are even less of it. It's impossible to take them seriously. They're such obvious fools, but they prop up the SNP government. And then you've got the Conservatives pretending that they actually won the election last year in May, and the Labour Party who can't make up their minds whether it's more beneficial to them to slag off Tories, the radio Tories, or the SNP. So they do a little bit of both. As always, the Labour Party sits on the fence. I'm only surprised Keir Starmer hasn't called for a referendum in Ukraine to see if they want Russian troops to go home. And I don't mean that to be unkind. It's just like they just can't make a decision. And that's where we are. It's just, so who do you vote for? And that's the difficulty. So we've just talked about this year and the party he's standing for. There are other people we know will be standing as independents. There are some people we know who will be standing for the main parties, and we wish them well. But I'm not particularly confident about electoral success this May. In fact, quite the reverse. I think there will be. I don't think there will be significant gains made. I don't think the Conservatives will hold on to the gains they made 5 years ago. I'll be astonished if they do. I think the Independents will lose some seats also. Labour might bounce back a little bit, but only because they lost so many seats 5 years ago. And the SNP will remain strong. Who knows what impact Alba will have, and who knows what the Greens will do. So it's not looking like it's going to be a particularly joyous time. So this is why we stress to people, please get registered to vote. Please get out there, so at least have your voices heard. So just lastly, Jeff, I mean, as John said, these shows do fly by. We barely get a chance to get started before the hour is up, but that's such is the way of it. I mean, there's so much to discuss. So just tell us a little bit about how you're planning to approach the election on a personal level, Jeff.
Well, I mean, local issues. I think that education. I think that because of COVID, right? There's a generations of kids at a particular age group that have really missed out. And education has been, really run down. Yep. Now, okay, a lot of it comes from Holyrood, but what I would say is that the council has an effect on, they control education, and they've made a lot of mistakes. They get rid of classroom assistants and closed an outdoor resource centre that kids could go away, Education is what I'm focusing on, because I feel that there's, you can look kids in the eye then and say, look, at least I tried. I think that they're being shortchanged compared to, my generation, your generations, David. The young generation are being shortchanged.
No doubt. No doubt. I mean, I think that will be very impactful, to be honest. I mean, the local council elections are very different to Westminster elections, where it's all first past the post and you have a huge fight and you win one seat, great, and move on to the next constituency. Holyrood's a little bit different because you have a little bit of balancing between the constituency and the list seats. Local elections is all about local issues, and nothing more so than, say, roads, say, health, policing, let's say, transport, and education. Huge for people. So I can only wish you all the best in your endeavours. I hope that you do well. We in the Unionist clubs, as you know, will be backing all of our members who are also candidates, I should say. We will be assisting with leafleting and stuff, and we'll do everything we can to get people who share our values elected, because that's pretty much the whole point of the Unionist clubs. But further than that, or further, in addition to that, what we need to do longer term is take stock immediately after the election and decide what we do next strategically. I don't think this method of stranding 3 Unionist parties against the SNP in future Westminster elections and in future Holyrood elections has got the remotest credibility any longer. It hasn't, in fact, because the SNP isn't suddenly going to just drop half its vote. That's not going to happen. So the only way they're going to be beaten is with a one-off, to start with, at least, agreement across the parties to get them out. Failing that, it's highlighting the SNP's incompetence and errors and failures to such an extent that fewer people vote for them. But even then, who's the party that's going to go and overtake them? We know that Conservatives haven't got the widespread appeal to do it, and Labour is so out of it right now. I think the only way Labour would come back and beat the SNP is if they had a truly charismatic, in fact, a messianic party leader in Westminster, and they certainly haven't had that since Blair, and look how Blair turned out. So half the reason people don't vote Labour anymore is because of Blair, and who can blame them? So tough times, very difficult times, but we never despair on this show. We always end on a positive note. So, Jeff, I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
No problem at all. And we will be speaking again shortly under the auspices of the Political Strategy Group. We'll be meeting up again very soon to talk about tactical voting. I've put in a paper to Robert Elliott, the chairman, just saying this is what I suggest we focus on, and that's been considered, and we will discuss it at an exec meeting, and blah, 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 and that's where we'll go. I'd just like to thank all of the listeners and all of the viewers. It's great to have this interaction. I agree that, yes, Peter Morris, I think people like you, in fact, I think you personally would be locked up if ever Scotland got independence, and quite right too. I'd lock you up. I'm only kidding, pal, only kidding. But no, it's terrific that we have this interaction still. Many thanks to John for allowing us to have this platform. And Jeff, before the election, it would be great if you would come on and just tell us how your campaign is going, and just give us an update on the voting and just what you've encountered. Would that be okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, right. Listen, guys, many thanks again to everyone for listening, for tuning in, and for watching. And we'll be back next week with yet more of the same. So thanks, everyone, and good night, and all the very best.
There are any number of issues in Scotland that need addressing. Health, education, drug deaths, the economy, but all of those are taking a back seat at this conference to one issue above all else, and that's an independence referendum.
Scotland doesn't want a Boris Johnson government. It doesn't want to leave the European Union, and it wants to be able to determine its own future, whatever that future turns out to be. And this idea that the Tories can just say no and sort of imprison Scotland in a union against its will, I just don't think will hold.
Independence is what the SNP is all about, and Nicola Sturgeon is expected to reinforce that massively at this conference. There will be no chance for people who are against the First Minister's policies to get a hearing.